Hi, I'm Tom Newberry, otherwise known as Spam Can. Having enlisted in the USAF back in '64, and then being initially trained as an aircraft instrument repairman on the F-105, and finally ended up instructing newbies and many foreigners on the troubleshooting of the instruments and fly-by-wire flight control systems on the F-16, and then a few years later working in a USAF Category 2 precision measuring equipment laboratory, I think I have a pretty good understanding of what goes on in a pressure cooker or canner. That being said, whatever you do as a result of this video, you do at your own risk. Messing with any sort of pressurized system carries with it associated risks. Protect yourself and others by wearing appropriate personal protective equipment and keep others not protected in a like manner well away from your area of activity. Enough said. Since pressure canning seems to be on the upswing, I thought it would be a good idea to create a video wherein I show folks who own pressure canners without dial gauges and their weights how I check the accuracy of the dial gauge against the weight which came with the canner, all without heating up the canner on the stove. This assumes that the weight in use has not been modified in any way. I could have checked the dial gauge against those adjustable weights, but I didn't have those. This process also allowed me to check my canner for leaks too. I decided to do this video because I had purchased a used 23-quart pressure canner. After canning a few times with it, it struck me that many folks haven't got the time or patience to run down to the agricultural extension office to have their gauge checked for accuracy, or maybe they live too far away to make the trip, or they just can't seem to get around to it for whatever reason. This is the used canner that I bought. It's been working pretty good as near as I can tell. Here's a view of the canner top. Here's a close-up of the dial gauge. And here's the blowout plug. And this is the lid lock mechanism. For starters, I purchased one of these valve stems, one of these removable valve stems, heavy-duty valve stems, if you will. The main worry I had was whether or not it would fit in the blowout plug's hole. This is the digital gauge I had. It reads to the nearest half-pound. I cut up a 2-inch square piece of foam, measuring a half-inch thick, and then I used a paper punch to put a hole in the middle of it. And then I found a 24-inch piece of string. First thing I did was to remove the blowout plug and replace it with a valve stem, a reusable valve stem, not the rubber kind. So, to get the blowout plug removed, using the tips of your thumb, you can work it like this, just pressing it through the hole, and it'll drop out. Okay, don't lose it. Valve stem goes in like this. Washer. And nut. Make sure you have the correct size rubber gasket on the valve stem before you insert it in the hole. Finger tight, and you're good to go for the valve stem installation. Next, I had to make it so that I could seal this after putting the top on the canner. In order to do that, I tied this up with the string and let it sit back down. So half hitch, okay, push it up, work the string over it. Okay, we got that set. Now we're ready to put the top on the body of the canner and pressurize it after one more step. Right, now we're going to put the top on and seal up the can. So, I'm going to match the arrows. Arrow, arrow, arrow. Where are you, arrow? Okay. Make sure the string doesn't interfere with placing the can on the top on the can. Okay, now in order to get the can to seal, the top, you got to push down on this because this is now being held up and may inhibit you from locking the lid. So push down, rotate, and there we go, sealed. Okay. Next, I threaded, that's free, I threaded the string through the holy foam piece. Okay, pull up on it gently and then work it around that edge of the lid lock while holding it up. Okay? So now that should be held up now, sealing and locking the can. Okay? And of course, my cat chimes in at the ideal time. Let me take care of her. We've got the lid on and locked. Now it's time to put on the weight. Okay? And I turn this just to maybe clean off the surfaces that this weight is resting on. Maybe get rid of any dirt that could cause a seepage of air. Right, time to get down to business. I'm going to run a little test pressure here just to make sure pressure builds. We haven't got any serious leaks. So, forgive me. Just off camera here. Here we go. Now I've got this pressure pump set to 25 psi maximum. So that should cause no problems even if the regulator doesn't work. Okay? Or I don't catch the pressure building fast enough. 25 psi max from this fitting. Okay? Here we go. What do we got? Yep, pressure's rising. I don't see any significant leaks. I'll continue. Okay, so we verify that this is now holding pressure, which means this is fully raised. The lid is locked. Okay. The air compressor is set to a maximum of 25 psi. Let's continue and we'll see how this puppy works. Now, I'm standing behind the pressure cooker and the camera's looking at the gauge. That's the standard. And I'm going to raise the pressure beyond the gauge, the 15 pounds here. And this will start rocking. Here we go. Now I'll just let it settle back down because it'll gradually bleed off because this is rocking. I'll give you a close-up of the gauge. Now you know that the system is working. Okay, so it's been just idling here for over 5 minutes, and you can see it hasn't leaked much. All right, so we know the seal's good. We know the lid lock seal is good. We know the pressure, the valve stem is good. So I'm going to pressure it up again and exceed, I'll probably get it up to 17 psi. And then I'm going to let it settle down. And when I let it settle down, I'm going to listen for this bobber, rocker, whatever you want to call it, weight, to stop hissing, stop rocking first, and stop hissing. At that exact instant, the pressure inside this can is 15 psi. That's what the gauge should read ideally, 15 psi, when this stops rocking. Okay, here we go. Applying pressure now. And of course the air compressor kicks in, but we knew that would happen. All right, now listen to this. "15 psi right now." Now I'm going to do this again, and the minute this stops rocking, I'm going to measure it with this digital gauge. And with any luck, you'll be able to read the digital gauge also. This verifies both the gauge, the dial gauge, and the digital gauge. Okay, let's see if you can read it at 0. That would be a test. Okay. Okay. So, I'm going to pressure it back up. Let it drift down. Listen for it to stop. Now, of course, the dial gauge went away on me. Okay, what do we got here, folks? 15 psi, near as I can read it. All right, what's the gauge read? Can't see it, but I'll bet it's 15 psi. Yeah? Do it again. Stopped. Reading pressure. Done. What do we got here? 15 psi. Amazing, huh? Okay, so as far as this pressure canner goes, it's checked. The dial gauge is checked. Remember, this is the standard. This is the standard. The dial gauge, Okay, so now you'll notice that when this thing is rocking, this dial gauge is reading, say, 16 to 17 psi. Watch. So if you have it just rocking gently, like that, what do you read, 16 psi? I can't see it from here, but it's at or above 15 psi. It's rarely at 15 psi because it can't be until that rocker stops now. Okay, so a lot of people, they'll have this thing rocking away, you know, like that. That's usual, that's normal. More pressure. Too much. What's the gauge reading? Okay, so that's reading true. It's actually 17 psi when it reads 17 psi. It's actually 16 psi in here when it's reading 16 psi on the gauge. When that stops, the gauge should be reading 15 psi. Now, should be reading 15 psi. Okay? So that checks your pressure gauge. That checks my pressure gauge for my setup here. Okay? I have a fixed weight. Those of you who have adjustable weights can do the same thing. Only just drop the pressure down. Now I can do that here, and now that I verified this digital gauge, okay, then I can also verify this at lower pressures. But this canner, this weight will never allow it. Well, if I operated at lower pressures, like say 11 psi, no, I want to operate it at 10, but 11 is marked, okay, because that's usually with a 10 psi weight. 11 psi is what you'll, gently rocking, 11 psi is what you'll see on the gauge, okay? But as long as that dial gauge correlates with this at 10 psi, then we know the gauge is very good down there too, okay? Here we go again. I'm going to just bleed it off. Yeah, I'll bleed it. I'll bleed it down to about 10 psi. Now I can't hardly see I don't want to turn the gauge away because the focus is critical on this. So I'm going to insert the mirror and drop it down to 10, just above 10 psi. Set my gauge to reading. Zero it. And now continue on down to 10 psi. Okay, now the gauge likes to settle out. Okay, so I'll probably see 10 psi right now. 9.5. I missed my target. Okay. 9.5 psi. Hey, I'll give it a half a psi, right? The tolerance they allow is 2 psi. So 9.5 is great. All right? How about 5 psi? Let's bleed it down to 5 psi. How's that? So I can be pretty assured that this gauge, dial gauge, is reading pretty spot on, no matter what pressure I'm reading, up to 15 psi anyway. Okay? So I've checked my gauge, I've checked my dial gauge, checked my weight. The weight, I mean, as long as that weight hasn't been machined, tweaked, adjusted, okay, then that sets the pressure, all right? Once you exceed the pressure of this, you'll notice okay, no rocking yet. Okay, there it goes. So with that kind of pressure, you'll notice that that gauge is now reading about 16 psi. That's with that gently rocking. It's still regulating meh, but not very well. Now it's regulated. Now it's 15 psi. Okay? All right, so I'm going to take it up. Woohoo! Look at that go. Okay? 17, 18 psi. The pressure regulator, now my compressor is set to 25 psi. All right? So it's okay to do this. There comes a point of equilibrium where the regulator vents enough to stop this gauge from rising. Okay? All right, it's stable at about 17 and a half maybe. Okay? Remove the pressure. And the minute that stops rotating, wobbling, 15 psi. Bang. See? So anything when this thing is moving, when this regulator, this is the regulator, this is just a dial indicator. That's all it is, a dial pressure indicator. However, I verified this against that, which is the standard. So, any of you are interested in any of this, why this is? A certain weight causes a certain pressure. Look at dead weight testers. Looked up that term on YouTube, dead weight testing or dead weight tester. Now, a lot of companies use a dial gauge. Even Presto uses a dial gauge. So my question is, why would Presto rely on a master gauge and send it out with its test setup for those organizations to check lids? The dial gauge is expensive. It has to be calibrated every year. Their master dial gauge, they have to send it into Presto to get it checked. All Presto would have to do is send out a cylinder with a vent pipe, a set of 3 or 4 weights, okay, with a pressurization port on it, an air pump. It would never have to be sent in for calibration because the weights are the standard and they don't change, unless somebody intentionally puts something on them or drills into them to change their weight. So that's why you can check the dial gauge on your pressure cooker if you have weight supplied with it, or use an adjustable weight. All right, enough said. Just remember to reset or take off your modifications before you pressure cook, especially this. All right? Yeah, and this too. So, how do we do that? I'll show you. Okay, so in order to set my canner back to its original configuration for canning food, I got to first remove this, the lid lock. So, pull off the sponge with the hole. I pull off the sponge with the hole, and then I remove the string. A little bit finicky here. There we go. Pull that off. Done. Now here I can slide this off. There's no pressure. All right. Okay, no pressure. Pull that. And now we're going to remove this and save it for when we suspect maybe the gauge okay. We can reinsert the safety plug. I like it. Makes it easy to insert. Stick an edge in there and then work it around, and when it's mounted properly it should flex a little bit, should move a little bit. Okay, it's not a snug fit. All right. And now we're back to normal. So check it out. Check the lid out to make sure it'll seal. Back to the arrows we go. Okay, so it should just drop on there. And we're done. We're ready to pressure can. And I'm going to reset this dial gauge so that this is facing this way. That'll put this in the background. It doesn't matter. The rocker, this will be off to the side, and this will be off to the side. So, all right. I'm done. Nice experience setting this video up. Hope you all got something from it. I'm going to leave some messages for Presto on their test set. Going to leave a few comments also on the universities or those. There's a few gauge check videos on YouTube, and I'll leave something in the comments on those eventually. And I'm also, you can see, I've got this marked. I'm going to be drilling and installing this permanently. Okay? Won't hurt anything. So maybe not, because it's so easy to do this. I mean, it's so easy to put this in place of the safety valve. Oh well, have to think about that. See ya.